Hi folks, John Ferguson Smart here. One problem I see a lot of folk having with test automation is that the test automation code can become very complex and hard to maintain and brittle. It can break all the time. It can fail randomly. It can be hard to troubleshoot. Now, what I see that is it's a symptom of two things. One thing is that it's easy to make code complex. It's very easy. The temptation is there to make things more and more sophisticated, more and more elaborate, add more and more layers, more and more things to cater for different situations as you go. Sometimes it's even quite satisfying, but that is not a very sustainable approach, because the more complex your test code becomes, the harder it is to maintain and the harder it is to make sure that your tests are actually trustworthy, reliable, that you can count on them to know that your software does what it's supposed to do. So how do you keep things simple? Well, the tricky bit is that simplicity doesn't mean keep the subject of your test simple. Sometimes there is genuine complex business logic that needs testing. Sometimes there are variations and business rules and edge cases that you do need to explain that are non-trivial. There are a whole lot of techniques you can do to isolate and break down complexity, which is another area, but that is something as a tester, you may have done training in that. Use that training to try and break down the complexity and to isolate causes, to isolate variables that change, to find edge cases, to describe things in a more modular way. Don't try and do an end-to-end scenario that tests everything. Test individual components, get individual business rules and focus on that. That's one way. But another really important way when it comes to keeping your test code simple is to make sure your application is testable. To make sure that your application has the hooks, has the entry points, is accessible, has the APIs that you need for it to be testable. That it's designed in a way that you have testability baked in. Now that is pretty much impossible to do after the fact, or very, very expensive, very hard. So if you want to do this well, then the best way to do it is to get together with your team before a story starts, before work starts, and talk about testability. And talk about how are you going to test a particular feature. What features do you need to build into your code to make it testable? What APIs, what calls do you need to make? What test data do you need to set up? And so forth. And that just thinking about that, just structuring that into the conversation will be much easier than coming back afterwards and having to do it once the code is written. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Thanks for listening, folks.